All right. Hi, guys. Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. Lovely. Well, first and foremost, it's just an absolute honor to be standing up here, being able to have a discussion about something I'm truly passionate about, but in a room full of my peers. We went to a dinner last night, and I think what was great about it is that there weren't just a lot of head nods. There were a lot of thought-provoking questions, and I love that. I love that we're challenging and constantly pushing for the innovation and movement in our industry. And so if you see something and you have a question, if you want to be nice, give me a softball, but if you want some real answers, throw me a hard-hitting one. I'll see what I can do for you. So after the pandemic hit, there were only 4 out of 20 companies that were eligible and viable to produce a vaccine here in the United States. 2 of them were successful. 1 of them went to market, but eventually had to pull due to complications. And the last one was a protein-based vaccine, which challenged the typical dominating mRNA space at the time. So it was just challenging at the time, and we went to market as well. So today, most of my examples are actually going to be from that time. It was a startup, so think very bootstrap mentality. We were figuring it out as we went. Didn't have a lot of tape because that tape didn't exist. So I am going to sprinkle in a lot of lighthearted examples. Just know that this is a doozy of a topic to really start at 9 a.m. Our coffee hasn't quite set in. But I do take my work really serious. I'm very passionate about this. Navigating crisis really isn't for the faint of heart. Sometimes the things that we see, you have to have a really iron stomach for that. And so that being said, with the right mindset and preparation, it is manageable, and that's what we're going to discuss. So I ran into this quote probably about 6-7 years ago, and it says, the secret of crisis management isn't good versus bad, it's preventing the bad from getting worse. And once I read that, I said, oh my gosh, that completely shifted my mindset, and it made me realize what crisis management really is. It isn't about fixing the splash. It's about controlling the ripples, and that's when the water analogy really clicked for me. It's just like a single drop, right? You don't need much to disturb the calmness into the water. One missed data point, one lapse in judgment, one misquote from a CEO can create waves, right? And it's just our job to make sure that that reach doesn't keep expanding upon itself further than it needs to. So I started using this ripple effect, honestly, because I had to explain my job to my management, my C-suite. And they said, what are you doing with all this data? I don't understand. And that allowed them to really visualize what my work was. And it wasn't something that we could just push off to an agency. I think agencies have their rightful place in our companies, but this is something that we truly had to own. And what I had learned is that the data was being sectioned off and siphoned off to multiple departments. So when you talk about building the silos, we were building them from within. So how could an agency even come in to partner with us? They didn't even know where to look. So we had to really take ownership of that data holistically and very, very intentionally. There is someone said a great quote, maybe you guys can help me out, but with great power, comes great responsibility, right? When we own the back end, we own the power, we can proactively shape how far that these ripples can reach. So what do we mean by a ripple effect, right? So the ripple effect it's simple, it's just a chain reaction. It's where one event sets off multiple series of consequences that can grow further when they spread. So today, most of us have some sort of access to online listening, whether it's organically through our websites, our SEO, Google Analytics, our social channels. Some of us have tools that can help us build dashboards, integrations, and some of us actually have agencies that can do this for us. But as we learned yesterday, AI also can play a huge role in this. And when these are used intentionally, online listening becomes more than just monitoring. It becomes a real-time market research engine, and that it can show us the warning systems really early. So what once required very large and expensive tools and teams, we now can be streamlined into a simple effort. So here's my analogy I want you guys to meet. This is Crisis. This is Crisis Rock, not to be confused with Chris Rock. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at Crisis Rock today, and the ripples are your organization. So this is my idea. This is my brain on a slide. Maybe Present can help me bedazzle this a little bit more, but this is my idea on a slide of how your organization, the water ripples are. So the ripples are essentially, it's the barriers or it's the obstacles that we put in place to contain, right? Our goal is to put them in place to prevent these ripples from expanding. There are going to be ripples. I do want to say that. I'm going to stay on this stage. You are going to have a crisis. It may be small, it may be large. It will be there. We can't get rid of that, right? But our goal is to try to prevent this from spreading further than it needs to. So let's go ahead and throw this rock in the water. So before it gets thrown in, we have to define what a crisis is, though. And hopefully we're doing this prior to the crisis actually happened, right? It's hard to fly the plane as you're building it. I hate that. So if you do have corporate lingo bingo on your table, feel free to check that off for this morning. But I do think that we have to really define what a crisis looks like for us, and it really is truly unique and individual for all of us. I've kind of thrown a few things up here, obviously low, moderate, and high, pretty simple. It can be organized by location. Is this something that is just for your state, your country? Is it global? Is it something that we want to do where it's media coverage? Is it just a few social media comments versus mainstream media picking it up? Is it an influencer? Does that define a crisis? If RFK is tweeting about you, that's probably something you want to pay attention to, right? Whether it's good or bad, I'm not here to say either way, but it's something that you want to pay attention to. Do you need to make a statement? Is that something that you have to have a reaction to, or is it something that we just simply monitor? So these are the types of things I want you guys to get your mindset in as we move forward. So to me, I think the low impact, again, those are just simple. Those are small things. To me, they're hiccups. They're annoyances, right? They're things that you just need to, someone has complained, your customer care team just takes care of it. You close out the comment, all is good. Oftentimes, they're resolved very quickly. You don't need a lot of upper management stakeholder alignment there. But what's great about them, and why I think you should take them seriously, is that it allows you to check your process. When this thing came in, how did your team react? How quick were they? What was their tonality? What was the level of sincerity? It allows us to test our process. So when the bigger things come, we're more prepared. So moderate, these are really small issues that can develop very quickly into large issues. We're talking span of minutes, span of hours. All it takes is one tweet, right? And those are the things I think that we should start paying attention to. I think that if we don't have aligned messaging ahead of time, this is where that confusion lies, and this is where damage to trust and credibility of a company starts to set in. So I think a good example for all of us in this room, it's our current administration. Again, either way, it doesn't matter. But what they're saying and what they're doing does impact us. The current executive orders, the tariffs that we're putting up with, we have to be able to have a statement, even if it is a non-statement. We have to be able to manage that to see how this is working for our company. So I do want to give us a real-life example. I don't know. Do I have any friends at Pfizer here today? There was one here yesterday. So I'm going to give a Pfizer example. So back when I was working at my COVID vaccine company, I was not at Pfizer. I was at the small startup. There was a far right-wing extremist group that was targeting Pfizer executives and their scientists to try to get them in like the aha, gotcha types of things. So they were cornering them at conferences, and scary enough, they were finding these people in their homes. And they were bombarding them at the door, sticking a microphone in their face, and trying to get them caught in a moment. So for me, that was a moderate crisis. That was a healthcare crisis to where, again, I was standing on the giants of shoulders, right? They weren't coming after little old us. They were coming after Pfizer. Pfizer obviously had the dominant market share of the COVID vaccines at the time. So they were coming after them, but I wanted to be prepared. So the first thing that I did was immediately start creating a crisis response plan for our executives and said, if this happens to you, this is how we react. And I then set up my data to be able to support that. Now, if I'm Pfizer, that's not moderate. That's a very high-impact crisis moment for them. This is something that could challenge the stability of their company. They were trying to break the credibility and trust of Pfizer, and that's why they were targeting them specifically. They wanted to discredit the science. And so obviously a very high-impact moment for them. So again, there is going to be some crossover, but what I want you to hear is that this is not a communications presentation. This is a data presentation. So let's figure out how it is that we're going to set up our data to be able to support this. So the first thing we have to do is we have to control, right? We have to control the current situation really with just stability. And I believe that this step is actually the most crucial. If we don't get this right, everything else that we do after this doesn't matter. Everything will magnify, enforce, and it'll just honestly create this momentum that will create like a riptide, and we just won't be able to get out of it. So I think this is where cross-communication is imperative. As you see up here, I have what I call the big three: security, regulatory requirements, and legal. As I say, one of them is going to hurt you, one of them is going to get you in trouble, and one of them is going to make for a really bad day. So if we can get these under control, if we can focus here, at least cover us from a protection, then everything else we can start having those conversations, honestly, a lot easier, because the top ones that are going to really impact our company are taken care of. So obviously security, high impact. There's really nothing else to say about that. This is an immediate threat on people, your building, your partners, your technology, your digital assets, intellectual property. This can have obviously a very wide range of topics. At my previous company, again, we were in a time of growth, and so what I did was I walked into the head of security's office, and I said, hey, tell me what makes a bad day for you. And if you want to hear some stories, walk into your security office and say, hey, what's a bad day, right? And so he was starting to share the things that keeps him up at night. But what I quickly realized is that he was only preparing for the physical threats. We are very close to DC, and so obviously if there were an issue, he would call the local authorities, local would then call the federal authorities, and we would open up a case. No one was really looking at the back-end data until our stock started to fall. And then all of these death threats started coming in. And thankfully, by that time, the director and I had such a fantastic relationship that back-end was already built for him. And it was hourly reports, right, of what's going on, how is this thing. I was able to talk to federal government and saying this is what's going on using my data, and he just sat and backed me up. This is really important, but again, it's important to set it up prior to the crisis actually happening. Obviously, we are all in healthcare. We have regulatory requirements that we have to fulfill. Adverse events. We want to know, do you have a scrape on your arm? Do you have a rash? Does your injection site hurt? Did you have an adverse event with our product? We need to know that immediately. And obviously, we have laws that say we have 24 hours to repeat such incidences. And lastly, we have our legal team, right? You want to make a lawyer's day, say class action lawsuit, right? Their ears are going to immediately perk up and say, what did you hear? It takes one. It takes one person to make that statement and then for others to join in. And we want to really be able to monitor that. So start from there and then work your way down the list. You have many more partners that I've listed here. I haven't mentioned HR. They're up there. You've got partners. You've got your executives. Honestly, they need to be in their own bucket. There is crossover depending on how you set up your back end to where you can see, is it a security threat and your executive? You should be able to see that. And then start having those conversations, right? So I've always said, I'm not an expert in investor relations. I don't want to be. I didn't go to finance. I hated that class in college, right? But they are. And so they need to tell me what makes a bad day, and then I become the expert in their data. Then I'm able to set up their data in a way that I can give them trustworthy, incredible data in a moment's notice. Okay, so let's see here. Yeah, so now we've done all the things. We've had our conversations. Now what? Well, we have to create an SOP, right? Easy. Go into an Excel sheet, start setting things up. So I'm going to show you a brief example of some of our crisis matrix that we have here. But we've got to do that, and then we've got to be able to test it out. Next, we have to build our queries. So if you're super savvy, as all of us are, you can use fun tools like Gemini. So you're having these conversations, set Gemini up, have her take all the notes, take those notes, put them into ChatGPT, say, write some Boolean for me. Obviously, a lot of human intelligence is going to be needed afterward. You got to clean up whatever ChatGPT did for you. It's a tool, not a solution, right? But it can do a lot of that heavy lifting. So some of us that have very lean budgets, some of us that can't partner with very expensive agencies to do this, you can be really scrappy about this. Sorry. And then lastly, we've got to be able to define our threshold, right? Is it N equals or is it percentage base? If you say the word bomb, if you say the word pericarditis, if you say the word inside trading, N equals 1. I want to know the moment that it happens. I want an email to me. I want a call to me, depending on what it is. I need that immediately. If you're complaining about our stock price, that's fine. That's a percentage base. You can keep complaining, but when it hits a certain threshold, fine. Send me a message because I pretty much know what you guys are going to say anyway. Most of you guys already have a crisis response plan set up through your communications team. But I do have 2 questions for you. Who owns that data, right? Where is that data coming from? Who owns the data? And when was the last time it was tested? When was the last time you put this into motion? I think, again, with our current administration, we're all going to be tested in ways that we haven't seen before. All right, so moving forward, this is kind of an example of one of the crisis matrices that I did. Again, this is probably 2 line items out of like 260, so it was quite extensive. I gave examples. I think this was great because it allowed not only internally to be able to see what was an example of crisis, but our customer care team. So as these things were filtering in, they had very specific ways of being able to know what's a crisis. And then we kind of went through scenarios of kind of defining when do you call me. I'll never forget one time I was trying really hard to get in shape during COVID. Didn't work, obviously. And I was in the middle of this F45 class, and we're hammering away, right? And then my phone just starts going off. And I'm like, don't do it. You need set healthy work-life balance, Jess. You can do it. Can't do it. Pulled it up. And I was like, oh my gosh, I got to go. And immediately stepped out. So the system worked. I had to pick up my phone, right? So again, testing. Are the people doing what you said that they were supposed to do as you manage yourself through these crises? So again, monitoring these, we have to stay ahead of the escalation, right? So as a data scientist, this is honestly the hardest step for me. Again, this isn't for the faint of heart, right? We get really, really compassionate and passionate about what we do. So it's hard not to take offense when someone is blowing up your Reddit space saying how awful of a company you are. Your job isn't to make them happy. Your job is to provide solutions globally to bring health to people, in our case, that were less fortunate and couldn't afford it, and honestly couldn't have the traditional vaccines because they didn't have access to a deep freezer. And our vaccine, how I was sold, you could stick it in a beer cooler and put it on the back of a moped. That's what we wanted to do. We wanted to drone drop in the middle of Ukraine during the conflict that was happening over there. That's what we wanted to do. Can't be drug in a freezer, behind you as you're working through these global crises. So if someone's worried about their stock price, it was so hard for me not, as the crisis management person, to be like, listen, Linda, you're missing the point. We're not here to make you money. We're here to bring health solutions. So my suggestion, if you are in this line of field, one, I'm with you, right? Try very hard to remove yourself from a situation. And two, if you are working with that person, just know this is taking a toll on them. They deal with the very worst of humanity on a daily basis. You can give anyone a microphone. Simon gave me this one. I still am questioning his decision there. But imagine giving your Uncle Gary a microphone. Immediately, his message just amplified. Now you got 10 Uncle Garys in a room. Message becomes deafening. It doesn't take much to get that ripple started and get that momentum building. So I do have a question for you, a poll. Damar Hamlin and Bronny James. What do they have in common? Anyone? Raise your hand if you at least know who the people are. Okay, we got a few hands up. Okay, they're athletes, right? They're young, healthy men, athletes, right? They're professionals at what they do. If you were to ask anyone online, they're going to say they took a COVID vaccine and that's why they dropped. Not it at all. They went into cardiac arrest because he had a congenital heart defect. He also had chemotio cordis. I don't know what that is, but that's what he had. That's what they had. But if you ask the internet why these two young, healthy men dropped in the peak of their health, it's because they took a COVID vaccine. Doesn't matter if it's true. It's public perception. And at this point, today, I had to look up the stat just to make sure. To this day, if you were to ask Americans, 20% of Americans still believe that we put microchips in our COVID vaccines, right? So those of you that have a COVID vaccine, 20% of the people in the U.S. believe that you have a microchip there. 5% of those people say it's 100% true, without a doubt. They're going to double down on that. And 15% of those say, yeah, it's probably true. Obviously, we had more of that because of who some of our donors were, so it came a little bit heavy at our company comparatively to others. But despite being debunked by all of the health authorities, it didn't matter. That's what people said. CDC, they couldn't make a splash. Those people, hard to reach. But they had the microphone, and people were listening. Does this sound familiar? Do your vaccines cause autism? Do you create vaccines that were to control the population? I bet some of you guys are sitting on the cure to cancer right now, and you're selfishly hoarding it because you're big pharma and you want to make money. Doesn't matter if it's true. It's public perception. And that's why we have to set these dashboards up to make sure that we can actually read this. So now you don't just have 10 Uncle Garys, you have 100,000 Uncle Garys, and they all have microphones. So what we're going to do in the top left is we're going to write our Boolean, right? You can either write this by hand. I'm a dork. I love this stuff. You can pay people to do it. You can even go to ChatGPT to write this stuff for you. But we have to understand how our customers are really talking. So those of you in diabetes care, what's that thing called when you hit your finger and get blood? Anyone know? It is a finger pricker. I'm surprised that you said that. Everyone calls it a lancing device. If you're a doctor, if you're an HCP, if you're a salesperson, you call it a lancing device. That's its proper name. So if I'm trying to monitor something that's going on with one of our products, and I'm like, lancing device, I can't find anything. Well, no one calls it that. They call it a finger pricker, right? And so that was something I learned when I was in diabetes care. It's like we have to listen to how the people are talking, even if we don't believe that they're right at all. That's how we have to go back and edit our dashboard. So we take what we've learned in our conversations internally, we then take what the people are saying externally, we merge those two together, and we refine our Boolean to match that. Then I use a tagging system. That's the next chart, the pie chart. If I have an investor relations data pool, right? It doesn't help just to throw everything in that pod. What are they talking about? So then I can start creating those subtags for that. And at the moment, this was what was really important to us. There were some partnerships, some earnings, WHO approvals, phase 3. You guys can read that. So we were then be able to break out. So if they really want to know about this partnership that we were having issues with, I could click down into that partnership very easily and say, okay, here's where we're going. Here's what's going on. It was a very organized it was like a Monet, right? It was beautiful. I love that. And then lastly, we have to understand what our baselines are. We have to identify these spikes and activities. I had a very good idea of on a given day, even though the investors were a little hot and heavy, I kind of knew the number that was going to come in for the day, right? And so I was able to identify these spikes pretty early on when something was about to happen. Now, I do want you to remember this bottom chart for the story I'm going to tell at the very end that's going to wrap this up. So remember this chart. We'll come back to it. So now we've got our data built. Now we actually have to respond, right? What are we going to do? So now it's time to guide these ripples, right? So it's already happening. How are we going to guide them? What are we going to do? For this example, I want us to think of Pepsi. And again, back in the glorious year of 2020, there was a lovely ad with Kendall Jenner promoting Black Lives Matter. What is Pepsi going to do? Well, the first thing they have to do is they have to isolate Kendall Jenner, Black Lives Matter, from all other global Pepsi comments, right? Because this ad didn't go global to start off with. It was very U.S. and localized. So they have to isolate that incident. The next thing they have to do is they have to interpret what was said, what was the intent, what's the sarcasm, what's the sensitivities behind this, right? Super tone deaf. I call this the read the room. You got to read the room. Even if the room is really uncomfortable, you have to allow for that silence of awkwardness to really understand what's going on. You've got to include. You have to include their story, their point of view into your narrative as you start working with your comms team to craft their story. Your data is the voice of the customer. You have to add that in there. They have to be a part of that response. It's not about you. It's not about your company. It's about them, and use your data to be their voice. And then lastly, you've got to work with your stakeholders to actually craft the message. Yes, time is of the essence. Another great example, when George Floyd was murdered, again, 2020, crazy year, right? Our neighbors, Eli Lilly, had a statement out in 4 hours. They were prepared. They were ready. Other companies, other global companies, U.S. companies, didn't put them out for days. They didn't know what to do with it. They were too scared to take a stance. They just kind of stepped back and they waited. And they were called out for it. Lilly wasn't. And I was actually really proud to have Lilly right down the street from me because I was like, this is what we need to be doing. They took a stance. It wasn't the popular decision at the time for major pharma, but they took a stance in what they believed in. I think some of you guys could say we're experiencing 2.0 version of that now. So what your job is that when you enter into that situation room, it's not your job to be a yes man. You're going to have a CEO up there saying some things, and you have to say, listen, respectfully, our data tells us differently. And here's where I think that we should go based on the data. It's not your opinion. No one cares about your opinion. We care about the data. Data is a lot louder than what it is that you have to say. So now the crisis is over, right? You've responded. You've done all the things. We have to circle back, okay? Corporate lingo bingo number 2. Go ahead and mark that off your boards. We have to debrief, gather the team. What happened? We have to then diagnose. Just as our doctors do, we have to diagnose the situation. Use your social listening. Did they call you out for your timing? Like in the Lilly example? Yeah, they did. They called us out massively. How was our tone? Did it even seem like we cared? Were we checking a box saying we're doing the thing and no one really cared? That's not the response they wanted anyway. At that point, you're just noise. What was your authenticity? Were you sincere at all in anything that you said? And what worked? Some things went really well. Some of the examples that I've given, we acted very quickly. It went well. You have to give the positives as well. And then lastly, just update your SOPs, right? You tested the thing got put, update your queries, update your thresholds. If you miss something flipped through. You have to constantly be in this evolution when it comes to your crisis management data because things change. People change the way that they speak online, and we have to be able to keep up with that. Again, all this can be done internally. If you are lucky enough, you can have a partner that helps you with this too as they stay on top of these trends. So I'm going to leave you with this and a quick story, and then I think we've got some time for questions. But building a good crisis plan, it doesn't happen by accident. It absolutely happens by design. It's a very thoughtful and intentional process. So a story I have kind of putting all of this together. I was new at this COVID startup company, and I was starting to build these dashboards out and starting to build and write all the Boolean. I was talking to the medical team, and I said, what keeps you up at night? And they'd listed all these side effects they wanted me to monitor and manage. I said, great, I can absolutely do that. So a few months later, again, still wide-eyed and bushy-tailed at this company, the word myocarditis pops up. And it's in Australia. And I said, that's interesting. That's weird. We haven't had that word associated with our drug before. That's weird. And so I went, like a dog with a bone, went to our team and said, oh my gosh, I have this thing. We should really look into this. And they said, nah, that's in Australia. We're good. And I was like, I don't know. I really feel like there's something to this. We should watch this. So I did, because I'm not going to back down, right? They continued to ignore it. So time marches on. It's now the end of spring. And I was like, people are still talking about this. This is a thing. And they're like, we're good. It's not in the US yet. We're trying to get EUA here. We're fine. I said, all right. And then remember that chart we talked about earlier? Guess where that popped back up? 2 days before a US EUA came through. There was a massive spike in activity because the EU puts myocarditis and pericarditis as a side effect to our vaccine. So all of the excitement that was buzzing around the building because the FDA is finally going to give us an EUA that we've been hoping for, just to really bring the solution globally, and that gets slapped 2 days before. I knew about it in January. This happened in July. And so I was so disappointed in myself for being in that room and just saying a yes man and say, okay, you guys are the boss. I trust you. I'm not going to say anything. I should have spoken up. Again, the ripple was still going to happen. I want to get you, I'm not going to control the EU, right? I know I've got some friends over there, but not good ones. That was still going to happen, but we could have been prepared with our responses. We could have been prepared better in how we handled the situation. Instead, we swept it under the rug because we were so focused on EUA and the FDA announcement a few days later. So that being said, thank you guys so much for your time. I very much enjoyed being here, and yeah, I think we have time for questions.
Thank you, Jessica. Great start. Questions? Yes. Sorry. Always on the wrong side of the room.
Jessica, great presentation, and I know we had some conversations around this. And when I saw your chart looking at, like, when something popped, one thing that I've noticed in some of these situations is we're monitoring the negative comments, but if we actually look a little further, we see the community, sometimes pushing back against those. And so it made me think, like, how do you determine your action you're going to take that in a way that incorporates, well, maybe we don't have to do anything because the community is already telling our message for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, this is where AI and I get into a little bit of a fight, right? I think they can help us get most of the way there. So at the time, I was very lucky that our customer care team was pretty stacked. And so they went through every single incoming message when it came to our team, both organically on our own channels, but then externally as well. And that whatever was digested, they tagged. So AI did most of the lifting, and they were right, probably 90% of the time. But one of the things that we did for sentiment, it wasn't if people say, like, I think on one of those things, they're actually sticking up for us, right? Sentiment rated as negative, because they were calling them a bunch of cowards, I think, fruitful language. But actually it was positive for our company. And so they would just flip the sentiment. So we could really get a true, clear understanding of what was the actual sentiment for our company. Another fantastic example, going alongside as I stand on the stage, is that, remember when Twitter was purchased by our good friend Elon? And all of us said, absolutely not, we're exiting this dumpster fire. Well, our company said, this is a fantastic opportunity for us to invest more. And I said, hey, not a good idea. I don't think we should do that. Again, I wasn't the COO at the time, so I lost that battle. He decided to double down, put all of his money into investing. And then I sat in the meeting and heard him very pridefully say, this is the most engagement we've ever had on a Twitter post, an X post. And me at this time, nothing to lose, I said, yes, you are right. 98% of it was negative, asking us what the hell we were doing there. I was like, you have got to read the room, right? And so in that case, you had to look at the sentiment. The number, the reach, the impressions, the engagements, they were amazing. That spike was off the charts for us, looked great. Then you look down into it, into your sentiment, and it's like, oh my, absolutely not. And so being able to truly say, is this actually positive towards our company or negative towards our company? It's not my job to say if we're going to respond or not. It's my job to present the data. I can give a recommendation and say, you know what? The community's got this. They're going to fight this battle for us. Let them kind of duke it out. And when mom and dad need to step in, we can. But not right now. So does that help? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Wonderful. Let's give Jessica another round of applause. Great speech.